Good. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much, Lawrence. Lawrence and his family have been great friends of mine for, here he is, great friends of mine for many years, and great friends of the 92Y, and really great friends of the world through your contributions, not just here, but to Harvard and to research and to all kinds of great causes. So thank you to you and your family, and thank you to 92nd Street Y. I think many of us here will agree that this is a very tense and difficult time for our country and the world. But there are many big and very important issues that we all need to be exploring, and the world keeps going. And this is a place, an intellectual center, an ideas center, and an action center where people can come together and try to build, through all of our actions, the kind of world that we would like to see. And part of what thinking about the future involves thinking about our own mortality. Mortality and thinking about mortality has been part of the human condition since time immemorial. There are many philosophers who believe that mortality defines our humanity. And that definition, for most of our experience as a species, has been dictated by the trade-offs made in evolution. And there are different animal species that are longer and shorter, and there are all these kinds of trade-offs. But for as long as we've been around, as long as we've been telling stories around campfires, our species has fantasized about breaking out of the cycle of mortality. Many of you know the story of Methuselah from the Bible, who lived to the ripe old age of 969. Those of us who aren't literalists think that maybe that didn't happen. But we've always imagined maybe David thinks it happened. We've always imagined what life would be like if we could break out of mortality. And we've fought back, and we've fought back very successfully. At the time of the Roman Empire, the average lifespan was about 25 years old. That didn't mean that everybody died when they were 25, but there was large infant mortality, and the average lifespan was very low. By the time of the Middle Ages, it had only expanded to about 30. In 1990, in the United States, it was only 47. And now, as everybody knows, in the United States and around the developed world, it's roughly 80. Average lifespan has doubled over the last 200 years. And it's not just that it's doubled, but it's that our expectation of what a normal lifespan is has expanded. And so this thing that we feel is very natural now, to live to whatever age we feel is normal, is set in a cultural context. And these changes, they normalize over time, and that becomes what everybody's expectation, what everybody's sense of normal. And we fought back using these tools that everybody knows: medicine, public health, nutrition, and lifestyle. And along the way, we've also had some really crazy ideas, crazy potions, crazy elixirs. About 100 years ago, the very popular process for life extension was monkey testicle grafting. And I was told in the green room that this process is having a comeback. So anybody who would like to volunteer, we're going to have a monkey testicle grafting booth in the back, and please let us know. But we, as you all know, which is part of why you are here, we are in a new age of science and technology. And one of the biggest transformations of this age is that the sequencing of the human genome has turned biology in many ways to an information technology. When computers were first developed, people didn't think about hacking into computer systems. People hadn't internalized this idea, things like Moore's Law. But over time, we've come to expect that our technology expands, the power of our technology grows exponentially, and that IT systems are inherently hackable. Now that we are turning biology into code, which is what sequencing of the genome has done, increasingly biology is becoming an information technology, and therefore it has the same qualities as any information technology, which is exponential growth, at least in some ways, and we've seen that with the cost of sequencing, the power and cost of sequencing the genome decreasing at 2 times the rate of Moore's Law, and hackability. And that's very, very important. And so we are in this age where all kinds of science are becoming informationalized, and they're on this exponential J-curve. And what it means is that our sense of timing, of how long innovation takes for us as a species, is going to change. Because right now our brains are designed for linear thinking. If you're living on the savannah and you have exponential thinking, if you're thinking 10 generations ahead and you're not thinking about the tiger that's coming to get you, you're in trouble. And that's why our brains are designed for linear thinking. But right now, this pace of innovation is going to increasingly get faster and faster. So when we think of maybe 1 unit of change is 2006 to 2016, it could be that 2016 to 2026 may be 3 times that, 3x. And 2026 to 2036 could be 10x, and then 50x. So the speed of innovation is going to increasingly expand. And therefore, our thinking, how we think about the world and how we understand the world, and the things that are fixed and the things that are unfixed are going to change. They're going to be brought into these challenges to the way that we think. And bringing that back to aging, we see these examples of aging in nature where there are a lot of, and we're going to talk about this, a lot of disparities. And we don't fully understand why it is that a mouse in captivity lives maybe 4 years and a mouse in the wild lives 1. And we have some good ideas why an average mouse on the street here, that a bat can live 30 or almost 40 years, why there are sharks that can live 500 years when there are other sharks that are genetically similar that live much less, and why there are jellyfish, and this is in my novel, I talk about this as well, but jellyfish that seem to be immortal, that go back and forth between mature age and a polyp stage. And so we're at this phase in our evolution as a species where we have a question. And the question is our mortality fixed? Is our biology fixed? Or are we hackable? And is mortality in one way or another, or in pieces along the way, overcomable? And hackable. And that's what we're here to discuss tonight. And we really have the super all-star team of people to talk about, as we always do for events at 92nd Street Y. And so going from my far left, we have Nir Barzilai, who is the professor of medicine and genetics and the director of the Institute for Aging Research at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. He is a recipient of many prestigious awards and serves on the board of the American Federation for Aging Research. He's also a founder of CoBar, which is a biotech company that develops mitochondrial-derived peptides for therapy for aging and its diseases. Next is Dr. Anna Marie Cuervo, who is the Robert and Renee Belfer Chair for the Study of Neurodegenerative Medicine and the professor in the Department of Developmental and Molecular Biology, also at Albert Einstein and co-director of the Albert Einstein Institute for Aging Studies. Also received many awards and is co-editor-in-chief of Aging Cell and associate editor of Autophagy. And to my immediate left is David Sinclair, who's a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School and co-director of the Paul Glenn Laboratories for Biological Mechanisms of Aging at Harvard Medical School, the founding director of the Glenn Center for Aging Research. He's published 130 papers, has many patents, and is co-founder and co-chief editor of the scientific journal Aging, and appeared in Time Magazine's list of the 100 most influential people in the world. And that's very influential. So why don't we start with a question for everybody, and then I'll have some specific questions, because we have a lot of area that we'd like to cover, and then we'll open it up to questions from all of you. So maybe starting with you, Nir, just to get our baseline, what is aging?
First of all, thank you very much for your introductory comments. I have nothing to add. And I'm just delighted. You know, those are the best scientists in the world for 2 reasons. First, because they are, and second, because they understood that aging is really the future of how we make health better, and not everybody's up to this speed. So yeah. I'm just delighted for this panel. And I would let them define aging, but I'll tell you what I say when I'm asked, not in an aging meeting. I'm just telling them about this couple, Midwest United States. They live in a house, and the wife turns to the husband and says, "Honey, why don't we go upstairs and make love?" And the husband looks at her and says, "Sweetie, I cannot do both." And I have to tell you, I was in Israel last week, and I told this story in a meeting that wasn't an aging meeting, And the Israelis immediately said, we live in one flat apartment. we don't have this aging.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So I think with that example, probably Nir already summarized the main point of aging, or at least from our point of view, that aging is a gradual loss of function.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, it's a physiological condition, but it's also physiological to be a child, and nobody wants to cure childhood. So why do you want to cure aging? So I think the reason why we are all interested in aging is because this loss of function affect your quality of life and also make you very vulnerable to a lot of stressors that normally you are very well protected during your life, and as you get old, you are not protected anymore, and that increase your susceptibility to disease. And that's the reason why we want to tackle aging, to really prevent those age-related disorders that you have here, the two major experts on that. So I think that the loss of function that Nir so nicely exemplified is only being able to do one thing and not two is the thing that worries us.
Yeah.
David?
Well, thanks, Jamie, for having us. I already disagree
Okay.
with Anna Maria.
Good.
I
We
think
planned it.
anyone who's got a teenage daughter knows that some
You
of us
want to
want to
cure.
cure a childhood. And so we aging researchers have been struggling to define aging for the last 30 years. And we're getting better at it. The good news is, though, that we don't need to know actually what causes aging to be able to do something about it. As we'll talk about, I hope, we found many of the genetic pathways that control the pace of aging, from yeast cells through to humans, and the races now want to control those. Although if we're in the mood for telling jokes, what I say is aging is a lot like pornography. I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. And that's really true. We know it when we see it, but just being able to describe it doesn't do science justice. We have to understand the molecular pathways, and that's really where we've come over the last 20 years.
So,
How did you disagree with us?
For the childhood.
about the childhood.
He wants to
Oh,
cure
the
the
childhood.
childhood.
Oh.
Yeah.
Pay attention.
Exactly. So let's start with you and then go back this way, because I was just these foundational questions. What do you see, based on what we know now, which you've just said is imperfect, as the mechanism of aging? What is happening?
Well, there's a lot that goes wrong, just as a machine falls apart as it gets older. But the good news is, if you use an analogy of a car, we used to think that our bodies were just like cars that would wear out and break down. So the idea of having a single pill to slow down or even reverse aging was ludicrous with that model or that analogy, because it'd be like having a magic wrench that you throw at the car and suddenly all the paint's fixed and the rust is fixed and the engine's fixed. That's never going to happen. But our bodies are much more complicated than cars. We have self-healing repair systems that we now know how to control with small molecules, and that's really the important thing. If I was to put a bet on what actually is the upstream cause of aging, though there's a lot that happens, including what Anna Maria works on, I think it's actually that our cells are what I call losing their epigenetic resilience. And that's just a complicated way of saying it's not the DNA information, the code that's being lost. That's the current idea. I think it's the cell's inability to read the right genes at the right time, so that our cells eventually forget their identity. And so liver cells start behaving more like other types of cells, and we get dysfunction that way. The good news is, if we still have that information, like a DVD or a compact disc that is just scratched, we should be able to reverse aging just by polishing it and allowing the cells to read the information that's in our genome. And that's one of the things we're working on.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to come back to the responses, but for the mechanism of aging, what's your thought, Anna Maria?
So, I mean, my thought is, again, that the aging is multifactorial, and there are going to be many factors. And I think the advance that we have done in the last, I will say, 5 years, is that we are starting to define what are those processes. So we know that there are several of them. There are probably many, but if you start focusing in like 9 or 10, you can start thinking how they relate. So, David was talking about epigenetics and was saying, well, this is upstream because it's the one that is going to organize the whole thing. And for example, in our case, we are the ones polishing and cleaning his jeans because we work in the cleaning. So of course we think we are upstream of him. And this is where the whole game starts. And that's the beauty, that every single mechanism of aging that we can think of is really interconnected. They don't, as David said, they don't function completely independent. But that's also the good part, that if you fix one, and that's why there are so many approaches right now of trying to fix aging, because if you act on one, they are so interconnected that you are going to have a positive effect in another one. So for example, my lab works in cleaning of your cells. And my mother always say, in a clean house, everything works better. So his genes are going to work better, his mitochondria are going to work better, and this is how things are related. And I think that, it sounds that it's complex because you have so many things going wrong, but this idea that they are interconnected make it very possible that by acting in a couple of them, you can completely put a rheostat and bring things back to normal, and that's the future.
Nir?
I think that was a good discussion. I want to, just for completion, throw a buzzword that's called mTOR. mTOR is a sensing mechanism of the cell. And when you inhibit that, almost in every animal, they live longer. And actually, they've lived the longest compared to other animals that were intervened. And I'm saying just because mTOR is there, the inhibitor is rapamycin, is used in clinical setup, and there are lots of papers who are talking about that. It's just an example of identifying a pathway, modulated, and showing that it increases not only the lifespan, but health span of animals.
Right, and we'll talk about animals in a moment. So just following up on that. So mTOR is working, and just people should Google later rapamycin. It's a great story of being found in the dirt in Easter Island. But what does that say about what's the mechanism of aging based on what the mTOR is doing?
Well, so the mTOR sense nutrient and kind of decrease the nutrient flux in the cells, or really in a coordinated way around the body. And it just repairs kind of the aging all over. And, that's the mechanism.
And one way to think of it, Jamie, is that I talked about those cars, that our bodies are like cars that get older. mTOR is one of those repair body shop mechanics. And what we're learning to do is to get them out of bed earlier in the morning and work harder to repair our body and keep it pristine.
So we're going to talk a little bit later about interventions. And I think everybody has, and we've already started to talk about that. But without even intervening, when we just look at the animal kingdom, there are just differences in aging of things that you'd think, like a mouse and a bat, you'd think, well, they look pretty similar. You'd imagine that they would have a relatively similar lifespan, or different kinds of sharks that look roughly the same, or different whales. But the actual life expectancy is drastically different. David, from looking at variations across the animal kingdom, what can we learn about the different processes of aging?
Well, so for a start, we've been very fortunate to have these lab organisms that we can, as geneticists, find mutants that live longer and figure out what are the genes that control lifespan. That's how we found genes like mTOR and others that control lifespan. But what's great about the whole panoply of life on the planet is that some organisms live a day or less, and some organisms live 300, 400, even if you talk about plants, more than 1,000 years. So what does that tell us? That tells us that, first of all, each species has a certain range of lifespan that must be encoded in the genome. And if you're lucky and you live a healthy life, you can maximize that. But there seems to be a genetically encoded limit. Say for humans, it's about 120, 122 is the oldest of all. And you can exercise as much as you want and eat a perfect diet, and that's about as good as you can get. But what that doesn't mean is that that's our actual limit. It means that, sure, we can live according to our genes, but if we have enough technology, we can fly. It's not in our genome to fly. We can cure diseases with antibiotics, and we can intervene in aging and get us, maybe not living forever, but giving most of us a chance to live into 90, up to 90 and 100 in a healthy way, playing tennis and raising the great-grandkids. And what it actually tells us is the other animals that live longer than us is that living a long time is not against the laws of physics. It's doable. And we just need to figure out what the secrets are.
Yeah. And Anna Maria, I mean, one of the things when we talk about extending lifespans, and in my introduction I talked about the progress that we've made. Lifespan has extended more quickly than health span. Why is that?
So I think it's probably a combination of factors, but I think we are the ones preventing our expansion of health span. And Neil already touched a little upon that with mTOR and energetics and food and eating. And I think one of the things is that the kind of things that our society has adopted, less exercise, eating all these things that we shouldn't eat, non-sleeping, all those things are going against the natural course of healthy life.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are really probably decreasing our resilience, and that's what makes us vulnerable to all those diseases. So I think it's like these changes, these new things that we are adopting in our life are probably the ones preventing.
So we're getting the diseases, but we're treating the diseases, so we're living longer, but having not being as healthy in our longer lives as we could be.
But the other problem is how we are treating the diseases. And on that, I think that there are two factors that, as scientists, we don't get the whole picture of what happened in the clinic. When we develop models to treat a disease, in many, many cases, those animals are not old. And the people that are going to have those diseases are old. So you are treating diabetes in a 3-year-old kid in comparison to what we do. So we are not putting the things in the right context. And the other thing is that we are treating, or we are doing models once at a time. And something that everybody knows is that you have comorbidities. When do you have somebody in the clinic that comes to you only with Alzheimer's? Probably that person is going to have high blood pressure, is going to have... So that's the thing, that what we are doing as treatments, we are not considering the most important aggravating factor, at least for the people in this panel, that will be aging, and the fact that you have several things at once. So if we go once at a time, we are never going to really tackle that.
I think that's a great point, because we put so much emphasis on cancer, and if we just eliminated all of cancer, our life expectancy would only go up an average of 3 years. Because if you're at the age when you're going to get cancer, even if you don't have cancer, likelihood you're going to get something else. And that's why there's such a movement among some people, I'd imagine everybody on this stage, to think, at least for regulatory purposes, of aging as a disease, so that we can have the funding to try to understand addressing aging and then preventing disease rather than treating diseases later in the stage. But David just talked about extending life beyond 122, and but in our internal email exchange about what we should name this topic, David had said, can we live to be 150? And Nir, you responded about the upper limits of possible life expectancy. Talk a little bit about what you meant.
I'm older than him, and to live in 100 years now seems not so attractive as it used to be. But I think David said that he'll provoke me, but he said things on sharks that I can say on humans too. We do have probably a maximal lifespan as a species, which, by the way, maybe is 115 years. You know, the fact that somebody lived 20 years ago, it's like the jumper in Mexico Olympics that jumped so fast that nobody caught him. You know, it might be a mistake. But anyhow, it doesn't matter. We have a maximal lifespan. The point is the maximal lifespan, which you said also, David, is between dying at 80, average age now, and 115, we have a lot of place to move now. And I think we're able to move now. And that doesn't mean that in the future you're not going to challenge the ceiling. But I think we have to realize that there is some ceiling and there's a big opportunity.
So of everybody who lives in the world today, what is the oldest of everyone alive today, the oldest that somebody will live? Like, who's the longest lived person of everybody? What's your guess? Is it 115?
Well, I'm on record. You see billboards that quote me.
Yes.
The first person to live 150 is already born.
Anna Maria?
I guess 150 sounds right.
115?
150.
10.
Yeah, no, 115.
Did you say 115 or 150?
115 or 150?
115.
115. So you're 150 and you're 115 and you're
And I'm
115
115.
also. Very interesting. All right, so we're going to talk about the fancy science. But before we get there, and just to give everybody here a game plan, because I think everyone is thinking like, enough, what am I supposed to do? There are mechanisms that have nothing to do with science and just how we live our life. And so we're going to talk about them very quickly. One, near exercise.
Exercise is the best advice that you can give anyone at any age, but certainly for aging.
Yeah.
Okay, it's good for everything. It's good for people who have diseases of aging. It's good for people who are afraid to age. Exercise has been the right thing, and I just want to say it's a little surprising because if you ask the public what's the major thing that happens in the body, they're saying, oh, there's oxidative stress. You know, we have to take antioxidants. And the paradox with exercise is that there's nothing to increase your oxidative stress more than exercising, and still it's the most protective way to advance aging.
Yeah, and it's crazy. What I say is that if we had a pill that did everything that aging does, people would be attacking the pharmacies to get it. They'd be killing one another. But if you say, but you have to wake up 20 minutes earlier and do a little jog or go for a walk, people say, oh, I could never do that.
Well, but if you give them the choice of caloric restriction or exercising
They
more,
exercise.
will be ready to exercise.
Well, let's get to diet and caloric restriction. So maybe first on diet, just because you come from a country where people eat healthy food naturally, and then caloric restriction, which has led to a lot of the more scientific approaches.
Yeah, so I think that the diet for us has been, I think that there is enough evidence of how much it can impact aging in many aspects, but from the point of view of what we've been discussing, one of the things that is very important is that your cells have to clean themselves. And I know that I keep talking about cleaning, but you just hear about free radicals oxidation, the damage that could happen. Somebody has to clean that. And our organism is so well designed that the way that you clean is when you need energy. So if you need to have energy and you don't have food, you're going to start breaking things that you don't need anymore or that there are damage. And it's this recycling what gave you the energy. It's kind of getting like, you know, the tree chopped then and get get it to the fire to get the energy. So you do that, and you do that every day. For example, in between lunch and dinner, if you don't snack in the middle, you are going to activate these cleaning systems because what they are going to do is recycle to maintain your energy. So I think for the diet, the most important thing is that the diet has to be very balanced. In addition of the calorie restriction, and we will talk about that. So if you eat a lot, then you don't have this need of using what is already inside or what is damaged. So by eating too much, you are preventing this cleaning. But also if your diet is unbalanced, if you have a lot of sugars and lipids, those are the worst things. These cleaning systems that also get impaired, you have your mitochondria, your DNA, everything gets modified. So in a way, it's what your grandma always tells you. You exercise, you sleep well, and you have a balanced diet, and then you will live forever.
So
That's not a Boba Maise.
Yeah, exactly. We were talking Boba Maisa, but I think this is a Boba Maisa crowd. So balanced diet, what does it mean? Like, what are the rules? If you say the 3 rules that people should take away about what a balanced diet means.
So I think the key is balance.
Yeah.
Balance in the sense that it's not all these extremes that is like no fats. And of course, if you don't take fats, your percent of calories are going to come from the sugars.
Right.
So we have, for example, studies going in the lab. If you put an animal in a low-fat diet, that low-fat diet is all sugar basically and a couple of proteins, and they get like so fat and so bad. So I think it's this idea of balance and, you know, Mediterranean diet. Why not? I think
Yeah.
it's a very balanced diet
Yeah.
that keeps people going.
So everyone's talking about calorie restriction. David, why does it work? What's the mechanism of calorie restriction? It's connected to what Anna Marie was saying.
Yeah, sure. The old idea was that calorie restriction just reduces your body's metabolism and you just live slower. But that's not actually true. It's been disproved. And what we think now is that it puts the body in a state of what's known as hormesis. Have any of you heard of hormesis? Raise your hands if you've heard of this word. So
If you raise your hand, he cannot see you.
Yeah, exactly. So you may as well raise your hand.
so hormesis is a concept that was actually first discovered by when people were spraying herbicides on plants. And if you dilute it down very far, the plants actually grow better. And another way to think of hormesis, it's a mild stress that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And by stress, I don't mean the most recent election. I mean biological stress, putting your body in a state of perceived adversity. So running will tell your body that there's adversity. Being hungry puts your body in a state of perceived adversity or hormesis. And the body mounts a defense response. It starts the cleaning process. It turns this mTOR pathway on and other genes that we work on. And then they take care of the fixing process. So essentially what you're doing is, with this analogy of this car repair shop, what you're doing is having a bullhorn and saying to the mechanics, get to work, there's an emergency, we need to build this car. And that's what being hungry and exercising does. And it's not that your blood flows better or being hungry burns the fat, and that's what's good. It's actually the body gets into a defensive state that can heal.
So
Can I say something to prove this point? By the way, David is from Australia. He's also, you don't have to just pick on us but in Australia, a group of researchers gave food with cellulose, with high volume of something else, and the mice ate only 70% of the calories. They were caloric restricted, but they didn't live longer. Okay, and the point here is we're not doing really caloric restriction. In other words, in the lab, we're not giving smaller meals. We're just giving them meal once at the end of the day. That's very different. That's intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
That's a stress rather than the caloric restriction.
So let's talk about fasting, because I think everybody hates caloric restriction. I mean, it's like there was a thing on the cover of the New York Times of these two monkeys, and one monkey was the indulgent monkey and one was the calorie restricted monkey. And the monkey that was indulgent looked kind of like old but kind of happy, and the calorie restricted monkey looked young and absolutely miserable. And so it's a bad choice. So calorie restriction, and this is a originally Jewish organization, we're not good at calorie restrictions. So let's talk about the other options. What about fasting? If somebody said, well, I hear you that there's exercise is beneficial, but some period of fasting could be useful. Is there a model of, like, let's say you wanted to do that, what would you do?
The intermittent.
Like, what does intermittent mean?
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
Well, there's plenty of different options. One that I know is called the 5+2 diet. You can eat normally for 5 days and then spend 2 days eating very little or nothing. What I do is I try to skip at least one meal a day if I can, and go hungry for part of the day and not snack in between. And that seems to work. And especially if you can eat an early dinner.
To see how long you live.
Well, I'm 75. If you eat an early dinner and skip breakfast, then you are basically fasting every day.
Yeah. So, and there are also going into that there are some very interesting studies now about this food clocking, that you can give the same amount of calories, but if you only gave it at 2 times a day to the animals, specific times, always this time, then they have this period of not food, and I think this is what David was referring. You get in this state of alert because you don't have food, you activate this whole process, and they don't live longer, but they have much better health span. They have less incident, they don't lose weight, so it's not a way to lose weight because you are taking the same calories, but you have this time to activate your autophagy, to be in alert, and these animals, they have less incidence of cancer, they have less dementia.
So what's the easiest way to do it? Would be like an early dinner and have a cup of coffee for breakfast and have lunch. I mean, because people are thinking, how does this apply to me? Is that a model?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah?
Well, Anna Maria lives on Diet Coke. So
I know, which is, not everybody is perfect. Although she is, I'm sure very close.
almost.
I'm watching, buddy.
So these are these kind of natural-ish things that people can do. We talked in the green room about swimming in freezing cold water, which apparently has some positive effects. We won't go into that, but if you have freezing cold water and you'd like to go swimming in the morning, you should do it. But can you each talk about the most promising scientific approaches to? I mean, you've all mentioned a little bit. What do you, just going from David across? What do you think are the most promising? I know you've worked on resveratrol and some other things. What do you think? What are the most promising scientific approaches to life extension?
All right. I would put my money on these control mechanisms, these body shop repair managers. And there are really three main contenders. There's a whole network of them, so of hundreds of them, but there's three main pathways that we like to talk about. One is, we've talked about mTOR, Nir brought that up. One is AMP kinase, which Nir also works on and is hoping to do a clinical trial to show that that can extend lifespan, or at least reverse some aspects of aging. And the third is a group of enzymes that I work on called sirtuins, and there's 7 of those in the body. And I like sirtuins, but they're all equally, I think, valid, and if you tweak one, the others change. So actually, we're all really holding the elephant just from different ends. If you're wondering what the latest thing out of my lab is, very briefly, we know that these sirtuin enzymes protect the cell, and that they need a little molecule that's got the name NAD. And we lose NAD as we get older. By the time you're 50, and I'm almost 50, we have about half the levels of NAD that we once had. And without NAD, you're dead within 30 seconds. So we're developing molecules that are going into human trials next year that boost NAD levels back up to youthful levels. And we see, at least in mice, remarkable effects that mimic diet and exercise.
So I sent my mother a podcast of David, and he talked about his own mother. And when my mother heard about this, she went on the internet and she ordered all of these NAD boosters and all these kinds of things. So either thank you or you're in big trouble.
Well, the resveratrol gave millions of people an excuse to drink red wine.
I know, exactly.
You're welcome.
Yeah. In the caseful. Anna Maria?
Yeah, so for us, as we said at the beginning, everybody's tackled from a different point of view. We are very interested in this quality control and this cleaning. And the beauty is that every single thing that they have mentioned also activate this cleaning. So the cleaning is called autophagy, kind of eating your cells. So mTOR inhibition activates autophagy, metformin that we hear in a moment activates autophagy, sirtuins activate. So in a way, many of these drugs or molecules that work is because they are touching in very fundamental mechanisms, and one of them is this cleaning. So in our lab, we have developed some compounds that we think activate this autophagy, and we have evidence of that. And at the moment, we are using it in some of these models of neurodegeneration, Alzheimer models, and they seem to be doing the cleaning, and they seem to do an effect. So that's where we are. But by no means this is going to be the only thing.
Right.
So I think that's the beauty, that what you can hear here is that there are very different ways that we probably are going to get this going back to balance, and that's what we really want.
Yeah. Yeah?
So metformin, by the way, 850 milligrams twice a day. If you're taking that, don't come to my study, okay? But we're launching a big national study that's called TAME, or Targeting or Taming Aging with Metformin. And we want to work with the FDA and show that aging can be targeted. And that's really the important thing that we're doing now. You heard that there are many ways to tackle aging, but unfortunately the pharmaceuticals are not going into this field because there's no indication to target aging. And what we're trying to do now is to do a study that will change that. We're taking this metformin, that is a drug that's generic, it's cheap, it's very safe, it's been out for 60 years, it's for treatment of diabetes, but it's not going to cause any adverse effect to people who are not diabetic. And if we'll show that we can delay a composite of age-related diseases, I think that the next decade will be just health span is going to increase and increase, and we're going to have a better and different quality life than what aging is associated with now.
Yeah. And it's funny, I was just saying before with metformin, which has been around since the 1950s, that it's become this wonder drug. I think a lot of people are excited about it, and I know certainly anybody with type 2 diabetes taking it. And when my dad started taking it, my mother, I told her about the research that you and others were doing, that she was so jealous. She went to her internist 5 times, and she was trying to figure out how she could frame what her problem was so that they would give her metformin. She kept doing research. She finally got it right and got it. But in 10 years, is everybody going to be taking an aging pill every day?
You know, I think you started it, or somebody said it right. This model that we have a disease and we get a treatment, and then we get, you know, the number of people who are 60 years old that have 3 diseases together and 3 treatments together, and every treatment has a side effect, and the combination of them are even, it's just the wrong model.
Yeah.
We have to really target aging and the effect, not only of course on the health of the individual, but on the economy.
Yeah.
I mean, it has been shown that this modest increase in health span is a $7 trillion saving until 2050. We just have to do it. That's why I think they're so special, because that's what we need to do, not...
Yeah. Yeah, in my novel, Eternal Sonata, the mechanism that this scientist uses is parabiosis, blood transfusion between, and so the model that, that Tony Weiss-Correa at Stanford is using is you get an old mouse and a young mouse, and you connect their bloodstream, and the old mouse starts to act like he or she is younger, and they're smarter and younger in every way, and the young mouse gets older. What's your thought about parabiosis, and as we were talking about before, self-parabiosis, storing your own blood stem cells so that you can get a transfusion later in life of your own plasma and therefore rejuvenate yourself? Who wants to
So
tackle this?
I have one of our core at the Aging Center is a parabiosis core. For $1,500, you can get a triplet, a young connected to young, an old to old, and then a young and an old together. $1,500.
For a mouse or a rat, not a human.
No, either.
A human?
Oh,
Yeah.
human too?
No,
Human and a mouse.
nice.
Sign
Not
me up.
connected. Not connected. The
Yeah.
thing. And we observe, of course, we have different projects, but we observe exactly the same. In fact, there's something really interesting about the intestine of the young getting old by parabiosis, and I think we're up to something interesting. So the parabiosis, there is an exchange, there is a flow of a lot of blood during a day. You know, the circulation is at least 100 times your blood is circulating. And the question is, how much do you need a plasma or blood in order to do any other exchange? And I'm a bit skeptical at this age. I think that from what I hear, this cannot be totally right. By the way, we're talking about stem cells, but we're talking about plasma too, okay?
Right.
They both can go, and maybe each one of them has a different, goes to a different place and have a different component. But I think parabiosis is a very powerful tool, and the application of giving plasma to human, I think it has to be worked out better.
Yeah. And in our earlier sessions in this Homo sapiens 2.0 series, we've talked about the genomics revolution. And the last session we did was on the future of fertility and in vitro fertilization and embryo screening. And so theoretically, at least, as we learn more about the genetics of aging, it seems that we're going to be able to predict, based on the sequencing of pre-implanted embryos, which embryos have a greater likelihood to live longer and not. Would you agree? And do you think that if we start selecting embryos to eliminate disease, we'll be able to select based on estimated longevity? David?
All right. So the interesting thing about, there's a lot of questions there. But
Sorry.
But on fertility, what's interesting is that what we've recently discovered in science is that females are not born with a set number of eggs. If you see that in high school textbooks, rip that page out, it's wrong. In many mammals, they produce eggs throughout life and through stem cells. And so we and others are growing stem cells from women's ovaries and mouse ovaries. And we can isolate these, we grow them in the lab, we can genetically modify them. And we have the technology, if we really wanted to, though we're not going to either modify or screen these cells for different traits or remove diseases like Huntington's and breast cancer. That's all in the future. One of the other things that's interesting, though, is that the same molecules that we're talking about tonight that reverse aging in adults also seem to work effectively on the reproductive system. And we have some early results that we haven't yet published, but between friends I'll tell you now. We can take an old mouse, the equivalent of a 70, 80-year-old human, female, and make that mouse fertile again and reverse what we call mousopause.
Yeah.
Now, think about what that'll be like in a society where you can put off having kids till after you've established your career and your marriage, and but that's the world where we're headed. And getting into questions about selecting embryos for this and that, I'm not really into that part of it. But I do think being able to prevent genetic diseases is something that's going to be much more routine in the future.
Yeah. But if we were doing that, and we've had other sessions on this, and I write a lot about this, conceptually, we would be able to choose based on a genetic fingerprint, if you will, of longevity?
Of course we could.
Yeah.
The technology is almost there already.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm doing studies on centenarians and their families, and there are mutations that are associated with longevity, and we're looking at strategies to develop drugs. Actually, there are 2 pharmaceuticals that are developing drugs around that. So we know, actually, from the people who avoided the consequence of health and got to an old age, we learned a lot that is relevant to a lifetime exposure to this kind of genetics.
Yep.
I'll just say one more thing about fertility that I forgot to mention, which is people say, oh, how long till this technology hits the marketplace? Well, in terms of fertility, you can already reverse aging in your eggs if you want to. This is not a plug for a company, but I did start a company called Oversicience, which rejuvenates eggs actually by isolating mitochondria, the energy power packs of cells, and injecting those with the sperm into an egg. And women who failed IVF many times are now having children. And so there are dozens of kids that exist now that otherwise wouldn't have. And that's one application of aging technology that we're talking about today.
Yeah. So why don't we go to some of the questions in the time that we have. So question 1 is, what is your dream research agenda for extending lifespans?
The dream, Richard.
Yeah. Like what's the dream, and what are the resources that you think would need to be applied to really make revolutionary change?
Yeah, so I'm very defensor of this precision medicine, and I know that there has been a lot of talking about that. But I think what is right for one person is not necessarily, the whole idea is the same, but I think you mentioned at some point, you said this signature of aging or this. So I think we have to think of aging a little of barcodes. It's like which combination of processes or which level you have, like for example, I'm 1.5 meters and you are 2 meters tall. So obviously the same blood pressure is not gonna be the same good for you than for me. So I think the same is with aging. I mean, and we've been talking about calorie restriction, and there is a very nice study showing that depending on your genetic background, even if there are mouse, the percent of calorie restriction that is beneficial versus no is completely different. So I think in my mind, hopefully with this precision medicine initiative, that you will start learning from healthy individuals what is considered successful aging and what is the signature of non-successful. We just should be able to identify what are the tools that are gonna make this non-successful signature to revert into something that is gonna help. And I think it has to be a combination and requires a lot of information about normal, healthy individuals and personalized medicine.
Anything to add on a dream research agenda?
Well, my dream is that we can accelerate this research. I know that it's a matter of when, not if now. We have the technology, just a matter of translating this, and people like Nir are going as fast as we can. You'd be surprised, I think most people would be surprised that a fraction of 1% of the research budget of the federal government goes towards the basic fundamental biology of aging. So we as researchers are suffering, we're laying off people, and given that trillions of dollars could be saved in the economy, it's quite depressing, and probably will just get worse over the next 4 years at least. But research agenda, I agree with Anna Maria that being able to measure yourself and optimize yourself even before you get sick is important. For too long, we doctors, these two are proper doctors, I'm just a PhD, but we scientists have worried more about sick people than preventing disease. But we have the technology now, even from a simple blood test, to be able to say, where would your optimal be? Not just are you out of the range, but let's see if we can give you this or that and tweak you so that throughout your whole lifespan, you're optimal. And we can actually estimate your biological age. And through using this biotracking method, and it's through, right now, a blood test, I was able to ostensibly reduce my biological age from 58 to 31 within a year.
And
But I
You still look 75.
there's
Can
still
I-
some
can I-
water in here.
Can I
Yeah.
also say something? So I was invited several months ago to the Vatican, okay? A nice Jewish boy in the Vatican. And they invited me, they said, there's a very small meeting, we want you to represent the field of aging. And I said, so I'm like the keynote speaker, and I said, no, the keynote speaker is the Pope and Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Okay? was a little
Yeah.
humbling. The Pope made a very important, so, Joe Biden and the scientists that he brought were talking about personalized medicine because cancer is really, you have your genome and the cancer genome and actually 5 different genomes. I get it. But aging is conserved actually among species. I think to solve aging on principle is easier to solve cancer in my mind. But what the Pope said is that he wished that even for cancer, there'll be a single, simple, cheap pill for everyone, okay? Because that's his view of the world. He wants cure for everyone. And I think that's kind of the hope that a pill like metformin or other things are, that we can develop actually pills that maybe will take us part way, independent of the personalized thing, because I think we have, I'm optimistic that we are not like the cancer people. We actually have real success, I think.
And would it help to classify aging as a disease? Because right now we have the reimbursement codes and this whole mechanism that when you have a disease or you get some kind of procedure, then we open the floodgates of money. But if there's something that will enhance individual health or public health, we're very stingy. Should aging be considered a disease?
My effort is to go to the FDA and get indication. Neither me representing the scientists, not the FDA, wants to call aging a disease. First of all, not everybody whose age has disease. And there's ageism. You don't want to... And so what we're trying to do is to say, we want to prevent the diseases of aging, right? And that will be a target. I don't think we need to call aging a disease in order to make progress. That's what I feel. That's what the FDA is telling me.
Yeah. It's not to make progress. It's just to get money, unfortunately. So another question from the audience. How many years of excellent diet and daily exercise before it increases your lifespan? And I'll add to that, if you could talk a little bit about the metformin with the mice, where you had the kind of the skinny, healthy, exercising mice, and you had the fat, older, non-exercising mice, but when they started taking metformin, the non-exercising mice actually live longer than the healthy ones. So what does this say? I mean, if somebody is, do you have to exercise your whole life to get the benefits of exercise? How much exercise do you need to do?
By the way, I don't know what study you're talking about, but not mine. but you wanna answer?
No, it might have been Rafa de Cabo's study in metformin in mice.
But it was with exercise?
No.
No, just with metformin.
Yeah. David, you want to answer that?
No, you're the physician.
Look, I think that exercise is kind of the hormesis, is kind of the stress that you need. Stress when it's chronic is not good, okay? Stress when it's acute or sometimes or once a day is good. And so I think a bout of exercise of 40 minutes 5 times a week, I'm just saying, is what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think everybody in this room should think of that as a doctor's prescription. That you should really just, if you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you a pill and says, take this pill because your life depends on it. I think everyone should think about exercise as that pill, and whether your exercise is just a walk around the block or something. And I say this a lot, and my brother Jordan is a sports medicine doctor, and he says and writes, talks about this, but that a skinny person who doesn't exercise is less healthy than a fat person who exercises. And I just think that's if there's one takeaway from this, it's don't eat too much, but exercise, exercise, exercise. So another question, you're only as old as you feel. It's framed here, true or false, but we will reframe it in the spirit of our conversation. You're only as old as you feel. Bubba Maisa or not Bubba Maisa?
I think biologically you can't overcome it, but you can certainly enjoy life. The converse is if you calorie restrict and you're always hungry, life may not be longer, but it will certainly feel that way.
And Maria?
So I think, I mean, one of the factors, because we are basic cell biology, so we always want the fats, but there is a growing component of how all these different aspects that we say of aging, these different cellular processes can be affecting, and is this psychological component. And I think we study it less because we don't have good ways to measure it in animals. We don't know if the animal is happy or is unhappy, but there is very clear studies now in population of how your mental state, your anemic state is influencing also your way that you respond to stress, your defenses. So I think in a way, and I think as example, my father, I think he's the happiest person there, the most optimistic, and you look at him and he looks quite younger than me. Yeah. So I think there is something about how you feel and how you take things. Yeah. There might be a biological limit, but I think that component is also important to modulate this stress that we talk about.
Yeah. Woody Allen said, I'm not afraid of dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens, right? And I think really that's not the issue. I think what people are fearing is the diseases of aging. Yeah. That's what they are fearing. And from seeing centenarians, and you can see in superagers.com in my web, you can see some healthy centenarians. Some of them are working at 106 years old. If you're healthy at any age, life is really good. Mm-hmm. I think it's the diseases of aging that are giving aging such a bad name, and we should stop it.
Yeah. And so that raises an interesting point, which is there's a misconception that our research is about making people live longer in an old state.
Right.
It's not about keeping people in nursing homes for longer, it's keeping them out of nursing homes for longer and compressing that last period of life where people are morbid into hopefully just a matter of weeks. Yeah. And so imagine that future where you can have a healthy, happy life and then just very quickly pass away and pass on the baton.
Centenarians live 20 to 30 years healthier than a control group. But the most incredible thing, they have a contraction of morbidity. They are sick for a very small time at the end of life. When the CDC calculated the economy of that, they showed that the healthcare in the last 2 years of life of somebody who dies at 100 is third of that who dies at 70. So it's not only that they live healthier, they die sooner, they cost less. And this is kind of...
Yeah, and it's my friend Dan Buettner. I don't know if you're familiar with Dan's work about blue zones. So Dan went around the world and found all of these places where people live longer as a group than others. And there were one was in Okinawa and different places. And he was looking at what were the commonalities of all of those. And it's a lot of the things that we've said. One is people have active lifestyles. So you just have to get around to go to the market. Just daily life requires moving around. Everybody ate moderate diets. Everybody had a strong built-in social community. So one was the Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, just where there was a community, I think called ikigai, which he talks about, an Okinawan word for a reason for living. And strangely, everybody ate a lot of beans. I don't know what to make of that. But the interesting thing was that in all of these places, there was an integration of the older people into the communities. And I think that's one of the greatest tragedies of the way, at least we in the United States, see aging as a diminishment. Whereas I think that it's not just, even if we didn't change the nature of aging at all, there's so much wisdom that older people have, and I think that we in our societies, we don't absorb that to our own cost. But my last question for all of you is, how can we enact the kind of cultural change that on one hand we're fighting against aging because people would like to at least live healthy as long as possible. But we need to change the culture of aging, how people think about aging, how people, the role that older people play in society. For the last question, I'd like to ask each of you, how can we think about changing our overall societal framework of aging? Why don't we start with you, David?
Well, we have been changing our view of what it is to be old. 50 years ago, being 70 was old. You know, and being 70 now it's not surprising if you can still run triathlons. I know a few people that do that. So I think we're putting the cart, your argument is putting the cart before the horse. I think that if we are able to allow people to be healthier for longer, imagine your great grandmother or grandfather getting on the floor playing with the kids and with the toys, then old people aren't as scary anymore. It's when they're smelly and they can barely move that then things get scary for little kids. And that's really what I think is going to change, where someone who's 80 or 90 is just as vivacious, healthy, and happy as they were when they were in their 40s.
That's really nice. Anna Maria.
So I think I agree that it has really changed. I mean, when I was in medical school in Spain many years ago, the aging, I mean, as a geriatrician, is like, well, you know, this is life. And that was kind of like, there is nothing that can be done. You are going to get old, and that's it. And you have now this kind of momentum, and it's very clear that there are things that can be done, that there are things that are being done, and you have two examples of two companies developing this drug. And I think this is already changing, so it's just a matter of time. And as David says, you know, older people gets more active and healthier, they are going to be integrated, hopefully, in the society. And there are many societies that are talking now, okay, what are we going to do with these people that are still so active and they are doing all this volunteer? So I think it's already changing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're giving you a vision that in the next decade, maybe we'll spend 80 years in order to get to the biological age of 60, right? So now you're biologically 60, chronologically 80. What does it mean to your retirement age? What does it mean to the social security? You know, what advice do you need? You need more economical advice than health advice by then, right? You need to plan your future. So I think, and we're not the experts on that, but I think it's true that if we're achieving what we're achieving, there's social consequence to that. And, you know, at the end, we want, instead of taking care of our parents, for our parents to take care of our grandchildren, pretty much, right? And so how do we form a society like that?
Yeah.
But this is not science fiction. This is science now.
And it's science now, and that's why we're having these kinds of conversations, because these are questions for all of us. And that's also why having this forum of the 92nd Street Y, where we can all come together with incredible panelists and incredible audience and think about these things and take these conversations home, is really what we're all about. So I hope you'll join me in thanking our incredible panelists for this wonderful conversation. Good. Okay, thanks everybody.